our local saint, Cunera, her miracle, there has to be a miracle before a person becomes a saint. And her miracle was that at some point during her life, pieces of bread turned into firewood. Now, you should probably say that's the wrong way around, but that's the way it was for her. So she's the saint of our little town at the River Rhine, Rhenen. And that's where everything happened. Must be centuries ago, when an old queen was waiting up on the hill, looking out over the river, because her son, the king, was about to come home. One day, another day, days went by, and finally, ships coming down the river, and there was a hustle and a bustle and everything happening at once in the little village near my hometown. The man had been away for a long time. Maybe there was some fighting to do or some trading. And now the village filled up with low voices and horses. And the king had brought someone with him, a young woman. He didn't tell whether he had bought her or took her or whether she had come of her own free will, but she was to be part of the household, and her name was Cunera. Well, it took her a while, you can imagine, to get used to being there and to take on to the chores of feeding the lambs and kneading the bread and everything that had to be done. But, well, she settled in quite nicely. Actually, she settled in quite nicely because the king seemed to be very, very fond of her. And at that time, people used to live in a large, long house all together. Well, it wasn't very easy to keep things a secret. But what happened next did surprise the queen, because the king at some point asked her to hand over her keys so he could give them to Cunera. Her keys, the keys that she had received from her husband as they married, the key for the lock on the wall around the village, the key for the locks on the storage rooms, the key even to the little box of money with which they paid traders that came down the river with salt, with nice linen. She didn't know how to deal with all those things. How could she ever? But, well, he was the king and she was just an old woman. So she handed him the keys and didn't say anything. But she was livid. Cunera, she tried to be really nice about it. Whenever there was a new chore of handling food or of handling what to buy or to sell, she would consult the old woman. But she could feel it in the village. She was losing her relevance. She was no more than just an old woman, not a queen with the keys, no, just some widow. So she was watching Cunera. She was looking for a fault. Now, at some point, it seems that the priests of the Christian faith have added a little bit to the story. They say this Cunera, she was a Christian girl in a heathen household. And she was really kind. She would collect leftovers of the food and bring them to villagers who needed some extra. And at one day the queen saw her. She had been gathering bread into her apron. And as she was walking to the door, the queen called out, hey, what do you got there? Show me. What is it? Are you stealing from us? So she came back. She opened her apron, and there was just firewood, little pieces like you use to get the fire going. And there was nothing against it, because it was her job to bring that into the house and place it next to the fireplace. It was a miracle. God had granted her an escape. But, well, of course, it doesn't mean the queen was now satisfied with her. So the next time the king left to fight some neighboring tribe, some evening, she saw one of the storage rooms with the door open. She thought, now there you have it. This girl, she's good for nothing. She leaves the door open. People can get inside. Animals can get inside. She went there to close the door and give her a good talking to. But Cunera was in that room. She was counting what was left, counting the stores. And it had always been the queen's duty, the queen's privilege. So she got angry. She got so angry. She took the scarf from her neck and she pulled it around Cunera. And she pulled and she pulled and she pulled. And Cunera got strangled. She fell down on the floor of that storage room, dead. Oh God. This was how to handle this. Well, she locked that room. In the night, the queen and one of her trusted maids brought the body of Cunera to the stables. They dug a hole. It was shallow. I mean, there wasn't much time and they weren't that strong, but they dug a hole. They put the body in there, covered it up with straw, and then went back to the house. Some time later, the king and his men came back and he looked around. Where is Cunera? Isn't she here to greet me? The queen had had some time to make a story, to spread it. Oh, sorry, my darling. I'm so sorry, but her father was here and he took her with him. Couldn't they have waited for me to come back? I'm sorry. He was so insisting. I can't help it. At that moment, one of the men who had been taking the horses to the stable called out. The horses were not going into the stable. They were walking backwards, neighing, stamping. They tied up the horses outside and the man went inside. Was there an animal in the stables? And he rustled through the straw. Maybe there was an animal there, and then he found this loose soil. And he thought that the animal probably dug into the soil and had gotten out. So he scraped it away, and there was the girl. The scarf that had strangled her still around her neck. Of course, the king was cold, and he was devastated. I mean, it wasn't his. He would never have married her. He couldn't have married below his class, but he clearly loved this girl. And so he banned his mother. And the story says that she jumped from our hill right into the Rhine and died. And the king, he reburied Cunera close to where now the church is. He wept and he mourned for her for many years before he married. And after that, her gravesite became a place of miracles. And eventually, she became the saint of Rhenen. Thank you.